Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell here, and we just got word about the release of Canada's next federal budget, which is likely the largest announcement to come out of the Canadian government each and every single year, because it shows us exactly where they're planning on spending their money for the next 12 months. Now, you can make all the promises in the world during a campaign or make all these political promises, but this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can't hide. We get to find out what their priorities are. Now, this impacts things like Canadian social programs like the GIS or the CCB or the OAS, as well as the future of the UBI in Canada, as well as the housing crisis that's going on here right now, and any new taxes that could be added on to Canadians. And it seems like the government will be changing and spending quite a lot, but it seems like they may have an interesting method on how they're planning on actually balancing this budget and making it look okay to spend the amount of money they're planning on spending. So in today's video, we'll be talking about exactly what is likely to happen, how it affects you, as well as some of the games that could be played along the way. But before we do, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and check out the links in the description where you can get $25 for free when you purchase your first cryptocurrency, or $50 for free when you purchase your first stock. But let's dive into this. We heard some comments from Chrystia Freeland just yesterday announcing her plan for the release of this budget coming very, very soon.
Our government was re-elected on a commitment to grow our economy, make life more affordable, and to continue building a Canada where nobody gets left behind. That is exactly what we are doing, and that is what we're going to continue to do in the budget that I will present to this House on April 7th, 2022 at 4 p.m.
So here we see Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the Finance Minister of Canada, announcing that in 1 week's time, we're going to be getting all of the details inside of this budget, and she receives quite the standing ovation by just announcing that. And it's very likely that this budget will contain a whole range of new programs and supports, largely due to this deal that has been signed between the Liberals and the NDP, in which the NDP will support the Liberals and will keep them in power all the way until 2025. So we could see more of these NDP priorities sneaking their way into the Liberal budget, things like progress on dental care, steps towards pharmacare, as well as other NDP priorities. But it will also likely focus on previous government promises that they made in previous elections or even before this election that have yet to be fulfilled. But let's start with benefits and supports and what we could see in the budget. Now, one important thing to note is that we're likely to see a broad slashing and removal of all of the pandemic supports that have existed over the past number of years that featured financial supports going out directly to individual Canadians to help them out. We're likely not going to see any sort of extension of this. However, I found inside of a sort of a committee meeting, a finance committee meeting held by the members of parliament that are on that committee, that reveals what the government's current thinking is likely around a UBI, as well as other supports, and how likely something like this is to come into play.
There's always gaps in our supports, and I think it tends to be sort of single males that don't have sort of a job. And I don't know if you have any recommendations on how we can help the particular group that might not have access to the other benefits I might have talked about in order to sort of support them through this sort of anticipated inflationary period.
Yeah, I mean, federally, we have a basic income system for seniors via the Old Age Security and Guaranteed Income Supplement. We have a system for families with children via the Canada Child Benefit, but we really have no institutional supports for adults who don't fit either of those two categories. It is one of the big shortfalls in Canadian income security. A portion of those people are going to have disabilities, and so some sort of Canadian disability credit or Canadian disability program would be an important part of covering that group. Another important part would be really changing the way the Canada Workers Benefit functions. So it is a support for relatively low income households, but it's fairly minor, and you have to have employment earnings. So if you don't have employment earnings, then you can't receive the Canada Workers Benefit. And one of the reasons why people live in low income is because they don't have employment earnings. And so changing the way the Canada Workers Benefit functions such that it does apply to people with no or particularly low incomes, I think would would really cover off that gap in Canada's income security system.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. And I will say to you that that was one of the recommendations that we actually put into our pre-budget submission on behalf of this committee.
At the very beginning of his response, he says that Canada kinda already has a basic income program for certain groups of Canadians, largely families with children through the CCB or the Canada Child Benefit, or seniors with the Guaranteed Income Supplement, as well as old age security. But that leaves a wide gap in the middle for people who don't fall into either of those categories. Now, he claims that the Canada Worker Benefit could be altered and beefed up so that it goes to more individuals, even if they're not earning employment income. So this could be sort of filling in this gap between these younger people and these older people for support for individual Canadians. Now, Julie Zarowicz, the Liberal MP who asked the question, said there at the end that, hey, this is something that we've recommended ahead of the budget. So this is something that could be included, that this CWB update to allow more people to be eligible could be something inside of it. But this does have some major implications for the future of a UBI in Canada. Now, with the partnership between the Liberals and the NDPs generally supporting UBI-like systems, many people thought that the Liberals might lean more in that direction. But this is sort of an answer in the opposite direction, right? Saying, hey, we already have these social programs in place for certain groups, we just need to fill in the gaps. So it seems like that's the direction the Liberals are leaning, rather than an expansive universal basic income program that covers everybody, instead filling in the gaps for programs that don't exist yet in between where other programs do exist. When it comes to housing, the government has a big challenge on their hands. They've emphasized time and time again how important it is for them to sort of tackle this affordability issue, but a lot of their plans that they've put forward in their election campaign, as well as other sort of documents here over the past number of months, have been rather underwhelming, but they're expected to make changes in this budget to actually implement more of these changes, one of which is a down payment assistance program, or an expansion of that program, that I don't think will have a big impact on affordability, because even if you make it so that more people can apply for and can become eligible to qualify for a down payment, well, you're just making it easier for more people to enter the market, and that could lead to even more increases in Canadian real estate prices. But on the other hand, we see pressure could be taken off of the Liberals in this regard if housing prices start to slow down on their own, or rather due to what the Bank of Canada is doing, raising interest rates. When we raise interest rates, it's harder to qualify for a mortgage, and there's less demand in the market. So this could become less of an issue if the Bank of Canada continues to keep raising interest rates, which it looks like they're going to do. I made a video recently going over tons of my thoughts about the real estate market at this time, so check it out. I'll link it right here if you haven't seen it yet. That'll give you a better picture of what I think is really going on in the housing market. But there are some major factors that are affecting absolutely everything behind the scenes. Now, as far as new taxes go, we'll have to wait a week to see what the Liberals have planned on that front, but the government is going to need some way to raise additional revenue to pay for all of this additional spending. But that's where things get a little bit shocking. You see, a lot of the things that have been negatives for Canadians over the past number of months, gas prices going up, inflation going up, well, those are actually positives for the Canadian government when it comes time to actually look at their numbers and look at their budget. Let me show you a clip and we'll break this down a little bit more clearly. This is Ed Fast, the Conservative member of Parliament, who is the chief finance critic for the Conservatives. Let's listen in and then we'll get into more detail.
So do you think that that's part of the masking that you're talking about, is the high price that the barrel of oil is coming back in the federal coffers?
That is exactly what I'm talking about, the fact that inflation is actually benefiting the Prime Minister through high revenues, and it's leaving Canadians far behind. So we have a Prime Minister who benefits from inflation, and all other Canadians fall behind because wages are falling behind the inflation rate, and the price of everything is going up, including housing. And that is something this minister must address in this budget, otherwise it will be a colossal failure.
So Ed Fast here is alluding to certain windfalls that have happened for the Canadian government that actually make their numbers look better on the books, even if it doesn't lead to better outcomes for individual Canadians. And one is because of the crisis in Ukraine right now, we obviously have extremely high oil prices. Now, Canada has a very large oil industry, and with the price of oil going up and sales of that oil continuing, well, the government stands to collect a lot more tax revenue from the sale of that higher priced oil. And this actually applies not just to oil, but to inflation in general. As prices go up across Canada, and I think everyone can agree that in most areas of life, prices are going up rather rapidly, well, that price increase actually helps the government as well, because the higher the cost of things, the more tax that's collected on these higher cost goods, leading to more money in the government coffers and a lower debt ratio, right? And also inflation benefits the Canadian government because of the mass amount of debt that they currently have, right? If we have inflation, the relative value of their debt, I'm not talking in real dollar terms, but in terms of the value of those dollars, that debt value goes down, right? The debt is less consequential if we have a rising cost of goods and sort of an inflating currency. Chrystia Freeland and the Liberal government is extremely honed in on one stat, and that is debt to GDP. GDP meaning gross domestic product, kind of like the big number that represents all of the productivity and all of the sales and all the revenues generated inside of Canada. Well, as long as that number keeps on going up relative to our debt, even if our debt is still going up but at a slower rate, well, then they say, okay, this is economically feasible because we're increasing our revenues at a faster rate than our debt. But this is only something that looks good on paper for the vast majority of times, right? Because of this inflation, the higher cost of goods, higher cost of gas, well, the government's debt to GDP will change because the gross domestic product goes up when prices go up, but that doesn't actually lead to better outcomes for individual Canadians. So in an instance where inflation might not slow down, and in fact the government stands to benefit from inflation continuing, we can take a few different financial pointers that you might actually be able to benefit from. Now, if you believe that inflation will continue and that the value of the dollar will go down over time, it could make sense to store some of that money in alternative assets like stocks, real estate, or even crypto. I know real estate, especially in this market, is hard to get into unless you have a ton of money already, but the same can't be said about stocks and crypto. For stocks, one of the things that I recommend to people that don't like to get really nitty-gritty with investing is to look into low-fee index ETFs. And you can do so on the Wealthsimple platform. You can actually use the link in the description to get $50 for free when you buy your first stock. That's a great way to go. And if you're interested in the cryptocurrency side of things, some of the blue chip assets like Bitcoin or like Ether, these are what my largest crypto holdings are. Those are usually okay bets if you're holding for the long term. They can certainly be volatile and up and down in the short term, but if you don't need the money for a long amount of time, that's where I'm holding a lot of my my net worth is in those types of assets as well. So if you're interested in that, you can use the link below and get $25 free when you sign up with Newton, so you can check that out. These are some directions that you might want to go if you're concerned about the way that the current economy is going. So mark it down in your calendars next week. That's April 6th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll be going live right here on the channel to watch this whole budget presentation that Chrystia Freeland's going to give, so we can know exactly what's going to happen when it comes to these benefits, UBI, any new supports that are coming out, what they're doing to tackle the real estate problem, inflation. We're covering all of it next week live here on the channel. So again, set your calendars for that. If you have any questions about anything we covered today, let me know down in the comment section. I read every single one and try to get back to as many as I can. But with that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.